I'm done. 2 words. That's all it took to bring a billionaire to his feet and change 2 lives forever. On a rain-soaked Thursday night, a woman nobody noticed walked into the CEO's office to quit and walked out with an offer that would shatter everything she thought she knew about power, betrayal, and second chances. But rising from invisible to unstoppable comes with a price. And some people will burn the whole building down before they let you succeed. If you want to see how a single moment can rewrite your entire story, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain didn't just fall on the city that Thursday night. It hammered down like the sky had something to prove. Sheets of water blurred the windows of Rowan Global's 73rd floor, turning the lights of downtown into smeared streaks of gold and red. Inside the executive suite, Caleb Rowan stood alone at the floor-to-ceiling glass, one hand pressed flat against the cold surface, watching the storm tear through the streets below. 32 years old, billionaire, CEO of one of the fastest-growing conglomerates in the Western Hemisphere. Single father to a 6-year-old girl who still asked him every night why mommy wasn't coming back. He looked like he had everything. He felt like he had nothing. His reflection stared back at him, sharp jaw, dark hair starting to show gray at the temples. Expensive suit that fit perfectly, but felt like armor he couldn't take off. Behind him, his office stretched out like a monument to achievement. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, awards lining the shelves, a view that made visitors forget how to breathe. Caleb hated it. Not the success, not the company, but the loneliness that came with it. The kind that settled into your chest at 11 p.m. when everyone else had gone home, when your daughter was asleep 3 floors above in the penthouse daycare suite, when you realized you'd built an empire but couldn't remember the last time someone looked at you like you were just a person. His phone buzzed. Another email, another crisis, another decision that would affect thousands of people he'd never meet. He ignored it. Instead, he walked back to his desk and sat down heavily in the leather chair, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his hands. The desk was clean except for a single file folder, employee performance reviews he'd been putting off for 2 weeks. He flipped it open without much interest, scanning names and numbers that blurred together after the first page. Then he stopped. Nora Bennett. Marketing analyst. Department 14C. He knew that name. He'd seen it buried in reports attached to strategies that had quietly saved campaigns his senior team claimed credit for. He'd watched her present once, months ago, in a conference room packed with people who talked over her, cut her off, dismissed her ideas until someone else repeated them louder. She'd sat down after 5 minutes, face flushed, and hadn't spoken again. But Caleb had listened, and he'd remembered. He pulled her file closer. 30 years old, 5 years with the company, solid performance reviews that somehow never translated into promotions. Her supervisor's notes were brief, clinical, dismissive. Adequate work ethic, needs improvement in leadership presence. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before, talented people buried under managers who were threaded by competence. He made a mental note to look into her department more closely. Then he closed the file and leaned back, letting the exhaustion wash over him. That's when he heard the elevator chime. 73 floors below, Nora Bennett stood in the marble lobby of Rowan Global, soaked to the bone, holding a single piece of paper that had taken her 3 hours to write, her resignation letter. She stared at the elevator bank, heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the rain drumming against the glass doors behind her. The lobby was empty except for the night security guard, an older man named Marcus who'd always been kind to her. "You okay, Miss Bennett?" Marcus called from his desk. "You look like you've been through a war." Nora tried to smile, failed. "Something like that." "Building's closed, you know. It's past 11. "I know." She looked down at the paper in her hand, creased from where she'd gripped it too tight. I need to see Mr. Rowan." Marcus's eyebrows went up. "The CEO now?" "Now." She didn't explain. Couldn't. How do you tell someone that you'd spent 5 years being invisible, watching your ideas get stolen, your work claimed by people who wouldn't know innovation if it hit them in the face? How do you explain that tonight? After your supervisor took credit for your entire quarterly strategy in front of the board, again, something inside you finally snapped. You don't. You just get in the elevator and go. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. He's still up there. Saw his light on when I did my rounds. He gestured toward the executive elevator, the one that required a key card. Go on, I'll clear you through. Nora blinked. Just like that? Just like that. Marcus's expression softened. I've worked here 12 years, Miss Bennett. I see a lot of things. And I see people like you, good people, getting chewed up by this place. He tapped a few keys on his computer. Elevator's open. Don't waste it. She didn't. The write-up felt like it took an hour. Nora watched the floor numbers climb, 20, 30, 40, her reflection staring back at her in the polished steel doors. She looked terrible. Hair plastered to her face from the rain, mascara smudged under her eyes, cheap blazer wrinkled from a 14-hour workday. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman at the end of her rope. Good. Let him see it. Let the great Caleb Rowan see what his company did to people. The elevator slowed, stopped. The doors slid open with a soft chime. The executive floor was silent, dark except for a strip of light coming from under a door at the far end of the hall. Nora stepped out, her wet shoes squeaking on the marble, and walked toward it. Each step felt heavier than the last. She'd never been up here before. The 73rd floor was executive territory, where decisions got made, where deals worth millions happened over handshakes and scotch. People like her didn't belong here. But tonight, she didn't care about belonging. She stopped outside the door, took a breath, raised her hand, knocked twice. Come in. The voice was deep, tired, but not unfriendly. Nora pushed the door open and froze. Caleb Rowan sat behind his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking nothing like the distant, untouchable CEO she'd imagined. He looked human, exhausted, real. His eyes lifted from the file in front of him, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Then his gaze sharpened. You're soaked. Nora blinked. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. It's raining. I can see that. Caleb stood, moving around the desk with surprising ease. He grabbed a towel from a cabinet near the window, apparently kept there for exactly this kind of situation, and held it out. Here. She took it automatically, too stunned to do anything else. Thank you. Sit down before you collapse. It wasn't a suggestion. Nora sat. Caleb leaned against the edge of his desk, arms crossed, studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Nora Bennett, marketing analyst, Department 14C. Her stomach dropped. You know who I am? I know exactly who you are. His expression didn't change. What I don't know is why you're in my office at 11:30 on a Thursday night looking like you're about to either cry or punch someone. Nora's hands tightened on the towel. I came to give you this. She held out the resignation letter, her hand shaking slightly. Caleb didn't take it. He just looked at it, then back at her. You're quitting. Yes. Why? The question was so simple, so direct, that it caught her completely off guard. She'd expected him to take the letter, nod, say something corporate and meaningless, and let her go. She hadn't expected him to ask. Does it matter? She said quietly. It does to me. Something in his tone made her look up, really look. And what she saw in his eyes wasn't indifference or impatience. It was genuine concern, like he actually gave a damn. That's when the dam broke. Because I'm done being invisible, Nora said, her voice shaking. I'm done watching Victor Hale steal my work and get promoted for it. I'm done sitting in meetings where I'm the only one who did the research, built the strategy, found the solution, and then watching him present it like it was his idea while I sit there and smile, because that's what you do if you want to keep your job. She stood up, the towel falling to the floor. I'm done giving everything to a company that doesn't even know I exist. But man. Caleb didn't move, didn't interrupt, just listened. 5 years, Nora continued, her voice rising. 5 years of proving myself. And for what? To stay in the same position while people half as qualified move up because they're louder? Because they look the part? She laughed bitterly. I wrote the entire Q3 marketing strategy, every word, every projection, every goddamn slide. And tonight, I watched Victor present it to the board like he stayed up for weeks crafting it, her hands clenched into fists. And you want to know the worst part? Nobody questioned it, because of course it was his. Why would it be mine? The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Then Caleb spoke, his voice low and calm. The Q3 strategy was brilliant. Nora blinked. What? The cultural segmentation model, the localized brand adaptation framework, the risk mitigation protocols for emerging markets. He tilted his head slightly. That was you. She stared at him. You read it? I read everything that crosses my desk, and I pay attention to who actually does the work versus who takes credit for it. Caleb straightened, his expression hardening. Victor Hale has been on my radar for a while. Tonight confirmed what I suspected. Nora felt like the floor had shifted under her. You knew? I had a feeling. Now I have proof. He finally took the resignation letter from her hand, holding it between two fingers like it was contaminated. This isn't happening. Excuse me? You're not quitting. Caleb walked over to a small trash can near his desk and dropped the letter in. Not like this. Not because someone else's insecurity made you feel small. Nora's anger flared. You don't get to make that choice for me. You're right. I don't. He turned back to her, and there was something fierce in his eyes now. But I'm also not going to stand here and watch talent walk out the door because this company failed you. He paused. Tell me something. Do you actually want to leave, or do you just want to stop being invisible? The question hit like a punch to the chest. Nora opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. I don't know anymore. Then let me make it simple. Caleb moved closer, not crowding her, just close enough that she could see the absolute certainty in his expression. You don't belong in Victor Hale's department. You never did. You belong up here. Her heart stopped. What? Senior Strategic Advisor, direct report to me. You'll work on high-level projects, international expansion, brand positioning, things that actually matter, things that let you use that brain instead of watching someone else profit from it. He crossed his arms. You'll have a team, a real budget, a seat at the table where decisions get made, and nobody will take credit for your work again. Nora couldn't breathe. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you the job you should have had 2 years ago. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Why would you do this? Caleb's expression softened, just slightly. Because I've been watching people get overlooked my entire career, and I'm tired of it. He hesitated, then added, and because 3 months ago I sat in on a pitch meeting where you suggested a complete overhaul of our Asian market approach. You got 3 minutes before someone cut you off. But those 3 minutes were the smartest thing I'd heard all quarter. She remembered that meeting, remembered the humiliation of being dismissed mid-sentence. I didn't think anyone was listening, she said quietly. I was. Caleb's voice was firm. And I'm listening now, so here's the deal. You start Monday. You report directly to me. You get access to everything you need to do the job right. And in return, you show this company what you're actually capable of when someone stops holding you back. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Nora looked at his hand, looked at his face, looked at the life she'd been living versus the one he was offering. It was insane, reckless, a leap into something she didn't understand. But staying where she was? That was death, slow and certain. She shook his hand. We have an agreement. Caleb's grip was firm, steady. Good. Now go home, get some sleep, and come back Monday ready to work. We have a lot to fix. Nora nodded, still half convinced this was some kind of fever dream brought on by exhaustion and rage. She turned to leave, got halfway to the door, then stopped. Mr. Rowan? Caleb? He corrected. Caleb. She turned back. Why did you stay this late? It's almost midnight. For a moment, something unguarded crossed his face. Loneliness, grief, the weight of things he didn't say. Same reason you came up here to quit, he said quietly. Sometimes the middle of the night is the only time you can hear yourself think. Nora understood that, more than he probably realized. Thank you, she said, for listening. Thank you for not walking away. He gave her a small, tired smile. See you Monday, Nora.
She left before the tears could start.
Nora didn't sleep that night. She sat in her tiny studio apartment, still in her damp clothes, staring at the wall and trying to process what had just happened. Part of her was terrified. Part of her was exhilarated. Part of her was convinced that when Monday came, she'd show up and find out it had all been some kind of mistake. But mostly, she felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. Her phone buzzed, an email. She almost ignored it, but the subject line caught her eye. Welcome to the executive team, onboarding information. Her hand shook as she opened it. It was real. Official. HR had already processed the paperwork. Her new title, her new salary, 3 times what she'd been making, her new office location. Floor 72, 1 floor below Caleb. At the bottom of the email was a note. Monday, 8 a.m. Executive briefing. Don't be late. CR. Nora laughed. It came out shaky, half hysterical, but it was a laugh. She was really doing this. Monday morning arrived like a freight train. Nora stood in front of her closet at 5 a.m., staring at clothes that suddenly felt completely inadequate. Everything she owned screamed mid-level analyst trying too hard. Nothing said senior executive who belongs in the room. She settled on her best blazer, still off the rack, still not designer, but clean and professional, and a simple black dress. It would have to do. She couldn't afford anything better, not yet. The raise wouldn't hit her account for another 2 weeks. The train ride downtown felt surreal. Nora kept expecting someone to tap her on the shoulder and tell her there'd been a mistake, that she needed to go back to her old desk, her old life, her old invisibility. But when she walked into Rowan Global at 7:45 a.m., Marcus was at his desk, and he grinned when he saw her. There she is, he said warmly. Heard you're moving up in the world, Miss Bennett. Apparently. She couldn't quite believe it herself. Good for you. Lord knows you earned it. He gestured toward the executive elevator. You've got clearance now, 72nd floor. Nora's stomach flipped. Right, thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me, just don't forget us little people when you're running the place. She smiled despite her nerves. Never. The elevator ride up was different this time. Not desperate and angry, but terrified and hopeful. When the doors opened on the 72nd floor, Nora stepped out into a world she'd only seen in passing. Sleek, modern, expensive. Everything up here whispered power. A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit approached immediately. Nora Bennett? Yes. I'm Claire Winters, Mr. Rowan's executive assistant. Welcome to the team. She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something approving in her expression. Your office is this way. The briefing starts in 10 minutes. Mr. Rowan doesn't tolerate lateness. I'm early, Nora said. Good. Keep that up. Claire led her down a hallway lined with glass-walled offices, each one occupied by people who looked like they'd been born knowing how to command a room. You'll be working on the Apex Initiative, our global expansion strategy. It's high priority, high stakes, and high visibility. Mr. Rowan handpicked you for it. Nora's pulse quickened. What exactly is the Apex Initiative? Expansion into Southeast Asia, focusing on Singapore, Vietnam, and Thailand. Market analysis, cultural adaptation, risk assessment, partnership development. It's a multi-billion-dollar play. Claire stopped outside a corner office with Nora's name already on the door. This is you. The office was 3 times the size of her old cubicle. Windows overlooking the city. A real desk. Bookshelves. Space to think. I'll give you 2 minutes to settle in, Claire said. Then conference room A. Don't be late. She disappeared before Nora could respond. Nora stepped into her new office and closed the door. Stood there in the silence, looking at her name on the desk placard. Nora Bennett, Senior Strategic Advisor. She touched it, half expecting it to disappear. It didn't. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Breathe, you've got this. Caleb. Nora smiled, took a breath, and walked out to face her new life. The conference room was packed. 15 people sat around a massive table, all of them at least a decade older than Nora, all of them looking like they'd stepped out of a business magazine. She recognized a few faces, department heads, senior VPs, people whose names appeared on company-wide emails. They all turned to look at her when she walked in. Nora's instinct was to apologize, to shrink, to find the least conspicuous seat and disappear. Instead, she walked to the empty chair near the head of the table and sat down. Because Caleb Rowan was watching her, and she wasn't about to prove him wrong on day one. "Good morning," Caleb said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. He stood at the head of the table, looking every bit the CEO in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. For those who haven't met her yet, this is Nora Bennett, our new senior strategic advisor. She'll be leading the cultural integration component of the Apex initiative. A few polite nods, a few skeptical stares. One man, gray-haired, expensive watch, condescending smile, leaned back in his chair. "Quite a jump from marketing analyst," he said smoothly. "Congratulations, Ms. Bennett." It wasn't a congratulations, it was a challenge. Nora met his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Pemberton, Senior VP of International Operations." "Mr. Pemberton." She kept her voice level. "I'm looking forward to working with your team. I'm sure we'll have a lot to teach you." There it was, the subtle condescension, the assumption that she didn't belong. Caleb's expression didn't change, but Nora saw his jaw tighten slightly. "Mr. Pemberton, why don't you walk us through the current expansion timeline?" The meeting continued, but Nora barely heard the first half. Her mind was racing, adrenaline flooding her system. This was it, the real test. Not just doing the work, but proving she deserved to be here. Halfway through Pemberton's presentation, a dry, numbers-heavy overview of market projections, Caleb turned to her. "Nora, you've reviewed the initial strategy documents. Thoughts?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Nora's mouth went dry. This was a test, not just from Caleb, but from everyone at this table who thought she was a diversity hire or worse. She could play it safe. Agree. Nod. Survive. Or she could do what she came here to do. "I think we're approaching this wrong," Nora said. The room went silent. Pemberton's smile turned icy. "Excuse me?" Nora pulled out her tablet, projecting her notes onto the main screen. "The current strategy treats Southeast Asia like a single market with minor variations. But that's not accurate. Singapore's consumer behavior is nothing like Vietnam's. Thailand's regulatory environment is completely different from both. If we use a one-size-fits-all approach, we're going to alienate local consumers and waste millions on campaigns that don't resonate. We have regional adaptations built in," Pemberton started. "Surface-level ones," Nora interrupted gently. "Changing language and currency isn't adaptation, it's translation." She pulled up a comparison chart. "Look at our last 3 international expansions: Europe, South America, Australia. They all followed the same model. Establish brand dominance through aggressive marketing, leverage premium positioning, focus on urban centers first. It worked because those markets share certain economic and cultural frameworks with North America." She switched slides. "Southeast Asia doesn't. The relationship between brand loyalty and price sensitivity is inverted in Vietnam compared to Singapore. The role of social proof in purchasing decisions is exponentially higher in Thailand. And we haven't even started talking about how government relationships and local partnerships will make or break us in markets where Western companies are viewed with skepticism." The room was dead quiet now. "What are you suggesting?" Caleb asked. His expression was unreadable. Nora took a breath. "A ground-up approach. Instead of imposing our brand identity, we adapt it. Localize not just language, but value propositions. Partner with regional influencers who actually understand the culture, not just international celebrities. And most importantly, we slow down. We don't try to dominate in year 1. We build trust first." "That's a complete overhaul of the timeline," Pemberton said sharply. "We'd miss our targets by months. We'd miss our targets permanently if we execute poorly and burn our reputation in these markets before we even establish ourselves," Nora countered. "Better to enter slowly and succeed than rush in and fail publicly." Pemberton looked like he wanted to argue, but Caleb spoke first. "Send me your full analysis by end of day," he said to Nora. "Include revised timelines and budget projections." It wasn't approval, but it wasn't dismissal either. "Yes, sir," Nora said. The meeting continued, but the dynamic had shifted. People were looking at her differently now. Not as the random new hire, but as someone who might actually know what she was talking about. When it finally ended 2 hours later, Nora gathered her things quickly, desperate to escape to her office before her hands started shaking. "Miss Bennett," she turned. Caleb stood by the window, waiting until the room had cleared. Alone now, he looked less like the intimidating CEO and more like the exhausted man she'd met Thursday night. "That was risky," he said quietly. "I know." Nora's pulse was still racing. "Did I overstep?" "No." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "You did exactly what I hired you to do. Pemberton's been pushing that strategy for months, and nobody's had the guts to tell him it's flawed." He moved closer. "But understand something. You just made an enemy. Pemberton doesn't forget challenges to his authority." "I didn't mean to." "I know. And that's what makes you valuable." Caleb's expression turned serious. "But from here on out, you need to be smart. Document everything. Keep records of your work. There are people in this building who will try to undermine you the second they think you're vulnerable." Nora thought of Victor, of 5 years of stolen work. "I'm familiar with the type." "Good." He hesitated, then added, "You did well in there. Better than well. That analysis was sharp." Coming from him, it meant everything. "Thank you, Us," Nora said softly, "for giving me the chance. You're earning it." Caleb checked his watch. "I have a board call in 5 minutes. Get me that report by 6. And Nora?" "Yes?" "Welcome to the team." She walked back to her office feeling like she'd just survived her first battle. And somewhere 70 floors below, Victor Hale was about to find out that the woman he'd spent 5 years crushing had just become untouchable. The report took Nora 11 hours to write. She worked through lunch, through dinner, through the gradual emptying of the 72nd floor as people filed out at 5, then 6, then 7. By the time she hit send at 5:47 p.m., her eyes burned and her fingers ached, but the document was solid. 63 pages of market analysis, cultural breakdowns, revised timelines, and budget projections that proved her point without being defensive. She leaned back in her chair, staring at her emails sent folder like it might explode. Her phone buzzed 30 seconds later. "Impressive. Go home and sleep. Tomorrow's going to be worse, CR." Nora laughed despite her exhaustion. She grabbed her bag and headed for the elevator, too tired to feel the usual anxiety about what came next. The office was almost empty now, just a few workaholics scattered across the floor, their faces lit by computer screens in the growing darkness. Nora walked past them feeling strange, like she belonged here but also like she was trespassing. The imposter syndrome hadn't gone away. If anything, it had gotten louder. The elevator doors opened. Victor Hale stood inside. Nora's stomach dropped. For a second, they just stared at each other. Victor looked exactly the same as always. Mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, tailored suit, that smile that never quite reached his eyes. Except now there was something else in his expression. Something cold. "Well," he said slowly, "look who's moving up in the world." Nora stepped into the elevator. The doors closed behind her. "Victor, Senior Strategic Advisor." He said it like the words tasted bad. "That's quite the promotion, especially for someone who was filing reports in my department last week." She kept her eyes on the numbers above the door. 72, 71, 70. "Congratulations," Victor continued, his voice dripping with false warmth. "I'm sure you earned it." Nora's jaw tightened. Don't engage, don't give him anything. "You know what's funny?" Victor leaned against the elevator wall, arms crossed. "I recommended you for a junior team lead position 6 months ago. Got rejected. Not ready for leadership," they said. He tilted his head. "But apparently you're ready to advise the CEO on multi-billion-dollar initiatives. Strange how that works." 65, 64, 63. "Maybe they were wrong," Nora said quietly. "Or maybe you found a faster way up." Victor's smile sharpened. Late-night meeting with the boss. Private office visits. Sudden promotion. He shrugged. "People talk, Nora, and what they're saying isn't exactly flattering." The elevator jerked slightly as it descended, and Nora felt her control slipping. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm just saying it looks questionable. Young woman, struggling in her career, Gets a private audience with the billionaire CEO, and suddenly she's untouchable. He straightened. You can see how that might seem suspicious to people who've been working their way up the right way. 47, 46, 45. Nora turned to face him fully, her exhaustion burning away into something sharper. The right way. You mean like stealing other people's work and passing it off as your own? Victor's expression didn't change. Careful. Or is the right way showing up to meetings and dismissing every idea that didn't come from you? Taking credit for strategies you couldn't have written if your career depended on it? Her voice was steady now, cold. Because if that's the right way, Victor, then yeah, I guess I did skip a few steps. The elevator slowed. 38th floor. Someone was getting on. Victor stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. You think you're safe up there? You think Caleb Rowan's going to protect you when people start asking questions? You're a liability, Nora, and liabilities get cut. The doors opened. An older woman in accounting smiled politely and stepped in, oblivious to the tension crackling between them. Nora didn't look at Victor again. She kept her eyes forward, her breathing even, until the elevator finally reached the lobby and she could escape into the rain-soaked night. But Victor's words followed her all the way home. People talk. And what they're saying isn't exactly flattering. She'd been so focused on the work, on proving herself, that she hadn't thought about how it looked from the outside. A nobody analyst getting promoted to senior advisor overnight. A private meeting with the CEO that nobody else knew about. The optics were terrible, and Victor was going to make sure everyone saw them. Nora sat on the train, staring at her reflection in the dark window, and felt the old familiar fear creeping back in. Not fear of failure. Fear of being destroyed for succeeding. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Heard you made quite the impression today. Coffee tomorrow? I'm curious about this Apex revision everyone's talking about. Amanda Chen, VP Marketing. Then another. Pemberton's pissed. Well done. Drinks Friday? Jason Torres, legal. And another. Welcome to the Shark Tank. You'll need allies. Lunch this week? Rachel Kim, Strategic Partnerships. Nora stared at the messages, her anxiety shifting into something else. Confusion. These were people she'd never met, senior executives reaching out like she was suddenly worth knowing. Was this what success looked like? Or was this what being visible looked like? She wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. The week that followed was a blur of meetings, presentations, and late nights that made her old schedule look relaxed. Caleb put her on 3 major projects simultaneously, each one requiring her to work with different departments, navigate different politics, prove herself to different people who all seemed to have opinions about whether she belonged. Some were supportive. Amanda Chen turned out to be sharp, funny, and genuinely interested in Nora's perspective on cultural marketing. Jason Torres was blunt but fair, the kind of person who respected competence over pedigree. Rachel Kim was harder to read, polite, professional, but with an edge that suggested she was waiting to see if Nora would crash before deciding whether to invest in the relationship. But others were openly hostile. Pemberton barely acknowledged her in meetings, directing all his comments to Caleb as if Nora wasn't in the room. A senior analyst named Greg Morrison made a point of questioning every data point she presented, his tone just professional enough to avoid being called out, but condescending enough to make his opinion clear. And then there were the whispers. Nora heard them in the bathroom, in the break room, in the elevator when people didn't realize she was there. Fragments of conversations that stopped the second she appeared. Promoted after one meeting with Rowan. Don't know what she did to get his attention, but sleeping her way to the top is a bold strategy. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the work, on the fact that her ideas were good, her analysis was solid, her contributions were valuable. But the whispers got louder, and they started affecting how people treated her. A project manager she'd never met refused to share data she needed, claiming it was restricted to senior personnel with appropriate clearance. When Nora pointed out that she had that clearance, the woman just smiled tightly and said she'd check with her supervisor. A junior analyst openly rolled his eyes when Nora suggested a revision to his report during a team meeting. With all due respect, he said, his tone suggesting zero respect, I've been doing this for 8 years. I think I know what I'm doing. Even Claire, Caleb's assistant, started giving her strange looks. Not hostile exactly. More like concerned, like Nora was walking into something she didn't understand. It all came to a head on Friday afternoon. Nora was in her office, reviewing contracts for a potential partnership in Singapore, when her door opened without a knock. She looked up to find Pemberton standing there, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Pemberton?" she said, setting down her pen. "Can I help you?" "I certainly hope so." He closed the door behind him. Didn't sit, just stood there, arms crossed, looking at her like she was a problem he needed to solve. "We need to talk about the Apex initiative." "Of course. What's the concern?" "Joe, the concern is that you've been here less than a week, and you're already trying to dismantle a strategy that took my team 6 months to develop." His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "I've worked in international expansion for 20 years, Ms. Bennett. I know these markets. And I'm telling you that your approach is overly cautious, unnecessarily complex, and frankly, naive." Nora kept her expression neutral. "I respect your experience, Mr. Pemberton, but the data supports a more localized approach. The risk of cultural misalignment. The risk of cultural misalignment is a consulting buzzword used by people who've never actually executed a market entry strategy." He leaned forward slightly. "You're playing it safe because you're afraid. You don't have the experience to know when to push and when to pull back. And frankly, I don't think Caleb understands what he's risking by putting someone so green in a position this critical." There it was. The real message. You don't belong here. "Have you shared this concern with Caleb?" Nora asked quietly. "I plan to, but I wanted to give you the courtesy of hearing it from me first." Pemberton straightened. "This isn't personal, Ms. Bennett. I'm sure you're very talented, but talent without experience is dangerous in high-stakes situations. And I can't let my team's work be undermined by someone who's learning on the job." He left before she could respond. Nora sat there, her hands shaking, her chest tight. This wasn't just office politics anymore. This was a direct attack. Pemberton was going to Caleb to undermine her credibility, and she had no idea how to fight back without looking defensive or incompetent. Her phone buzzed. A calendar notification. Executive Leadership Dinner, 7 p.m., the Meridian. She'd forgotten about it. Monthly gathering of senior leadership, mandatory attendance, business formal. The kind of event where real decisions got made over wine and steak, while everyone pretended it was just socializing. Nora looked down at her clothes. Black slacks, simple blouse, flats. She had nothing appropriate for a place like the Meridian. Nothing that would make her look like she belonged among people who spent more on shoes than she made in a month. She grabbed her phone and texted the only person she could think of. "I need help. Emergency. Are you free?" Amanda Chen's response came 30 seconds later. "Always. What's wrong?" "I have nothing to wear to tonight's dinner, and I'm about to have a breakdown." "Say no more. My office. Now." 20 minutes later, Nora stood in Amanda's office while the VP of marketing circled her like a fashion consultant, assessing the damage. "Okay," Amanda said finally. "It's not as bad as I thought. You've got good bones. We just need to dress them properly." She pulled out her phone. "What size are you?" 6, but perfect. Same as my assistant. "Karen," Amanda called out. A young woman appeared in the doorway. "Bring me the Armani sheath, the midnight blue one, and the Louboutin, size 7. "I can't borrow your clothes," Nora protested. "You're not borrowing. You're accepting a gift from someone who remembers what it's like to be the new person at the table." Amanda's expression softened. "I've been where you are, Nora. Promoted too fast, surrounded by people waiting for you to fail, wearing clothes that screamed, 'I don't belong here.' And you know what I learned? Perception matters. Not because it should, but because it does. So tonight, you're going to walk into that dinner looking like you own the place. Because the second they see weakness, they'll tear you apart." Karen returned with a garment bag and shoebox. Amanda unzipped the bag, revealing a sleek navy dress that probably cost more than Nora's monthly rent. "I can't," Nora whispered. "You can, and you will." Amanda thrust the bag into her hands. "Get changed. We have 2 hours before dinner, and I need to teach you how to survive a room full of sharks." The Meridian was exactly as intimidating as Nora had feared.
Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, waiters in white gloves.
and a clientele that looked like they'd stepped out of a Forbes photo shoot. Nora walked in wearing Amanda's dress and shoes, her hair styled in a way that made her look polished instead of overwhelmed, and tried not to think about the fact that she was wearing someone else's armor. The private dining room was already half full when she arrived. Executives clustered in small groups, drinks in hand, voices low and confident. Nora recognized most of them from meetings, department heads, VPs, senior directors, the people who ran Rowan Global from behind the scenes. And at the far end of the room, standing by the window with a glass of scotch, was Caleb. He was talking to Pemberton, his expression unreadable. Whatever they were discussing, it looked serious. Nora's stomach tightened. Was Pemberton already making his case? Already poisoning the well? First one's always the worst. Nora turned to find Jason Torres beside her, holding 2 glasses of wine. He offered her one. "You look like you need this."
That obvious? Only to people who've been there. He took a sip of his own drink. Word of advice? Don't hide in the corner. Circulate. Make small talk. Let people see you're human. The more invisible you try to be, the more they'll assume you're hiding something. I'm not hiding anything. I know, but they don't. Jason nodded toward a group near the bar. Start with Rachel and her team. They're gossipy, but mostly harmless.
Avoid Pemberton's crowd until after dinner, and whatever you do, don't let anyone corner you alone. Sharks can smell blood. He walked away before Nora could ask what he meant by that last part. She took a breath and moved toward Rachel's group, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Rachel saw her coming and smiled, the kind of smile that could mean anything.
Nora, you look stunning. Is that Amanda's dress? So much for subtle. She was kind enough to lend it to me. Smart. Amanda has excellent taste. Rachel's tone was light, but her eyes were assessing. So tell us, how are you finding life on the executive floor? It must be quite the adjustment from marketing analysis. There was a trap in that question somewhere. Nora could feel it. It's challenging, she said carefully, but I'm learning a lot. I'm sure you are. Caleb's an excellent mentor. Rachel sipped her wine. He doesn't usually take such a personal interest in new hires. You must have really impressed him. The other women in the group exchanged glances. Nora felt her face flush. I think he saw potential that was being underutilized, she said evenly. Clearly. Rachel's smile didn't waver. Just be careful, darling. The higher you climb, the harder the fall. And there are a lot of people watching to see which way you go. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. More like a warning wrapped in pleasantries. Before Nora could respond,
a voice cut through the conversation. Ms. Bennett. Everyone turned. Caleb stood a few feet away, his expression neutral. Could I borrow you for a moment? It wasn't a request. Nora excused herself and followed him toward the window, aware of every eye in the room tracking their movement. You look like you're about to bolt, Caleb said quietly, once they were out of earshot. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. He took a sip of his scotch. Pemberton cornered me earlier, expressed some concerns about your readiness for the Apex initiative. Nora's heart sank. What did you say? I told him his concerns were noted and that I had full confidence in your abilities. Caleb's gaze shifted to her. But I need you to understand something. This isn't going to stop. Pemberton's not the only one who thinks you're moving too fast. There are people in this room who would love nothing more than to see you fail, because your success means they were wrong about you. And admitting they were wrong isn't something these people do easily. So what am I supposed to do? Keep your head down. Do the work. Don't give them ammunition. He paused. And don't let them see you rattled. Confidence isn't something you feel, Nora. It's something you project until it becomes real. A waiter approached with a small bell signaling dinner. The crowd began moving toward the long table at the center of the room. Caleb set down his glass. You're sitting next to me tonight. It'll make a statement. What kind of statement? That I'm not backing down from this decision, and neither should you. Dinner was 2 hours of carefully choreographed conversation disguised as casual socializing. Nora sat between Caleb and Amanda, navigating questions about her background, her strategy, her plans, all while trying to read the subtext beneath every polite inquiry. Pemberton sat directly across from her. He didn't speak to her once. But halfway through the main course, he addressed Caleb with a question clearly designed to put Nora on the spot. "I've been thinking about the Apex timeline," Pemberton said smoothly. "Given the aggressive targets we've set, I'm curious how Ms. Bennett plans to balance thorough cultural research with the need to move quickly. In my experience, overanalysis leads to paralysis. And in markets like Southeast Asia, hesitation can be fatal." Every conversation at the table stopped. All eyes turned to Nora. She set down her fork carefully, buying herself a second to think. This was a test. Not just from Pemberton, but from everyone watching. "You're right that hesitation can be fatal," Nora said calmly. "But so can arrogance. Moving fast without understanding the cultural landscape is how companies waste hundreds of millions on campaigns that alienate their target audience." She met Pemberton's gaze. "The research phase I'm proposing doesn't slow us down. It ensures that when we do move, we move with precision. We're not trying to dominate these markets in 6 months. We're trying to build sustainable presence over 5 years. That requires a foundation built on insight, not assumption." Pemberton's smile was thin. "And if our competitors beat us to market while we're still researching?" "Then they'll make the mistakes that teach us what not to do," Nora replied. "I'd rather be second and successful than first and failed." Someone at the end of the table laughed. Amanda nudged her under the table approvingly. Caleb's expression didn't change, but Nora caught the faintest hint of approval in his eyes. Pemberton didn't ask any more questions. The dinner ended around 10. People filtered out in groups, still talking, still networking, still playing the game that never really stopped. Nora waited until most of them had left before gathering her things. "You survived." She turned to find Caleb putting on his coat. The room was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers finishing their drinks. "Barely," Nora admitted. "Pemberton's going to be a problem," Caleb said bluntly. "He doesn't like being challenged, and he especially doesn't like being challenged by someone he thinks hasn't earned the right. So what do I do? Make him irrelevant." Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact. "Do the work so well that his objections look like petty politics instead of legitimate concerns. Make your analysis so airtight that questioning it makes him look foolish. And whatever you do, don't give him personal ammunition." Nora thought about the whispers, the rumors, the implications Victor had made in the elevator. "What if it's too late for that?" she asked quietly. Caleb's expression hardened. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, then decided he needed to know. "People are talking about how I got promoted, about the late-night meeting in your office. They're saying She couldn't finish the sentence. "They're saying you slept your way here." Caleb's voice was flat, dangerous. "Yes." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then he turned away, his jaw tight. "That's my fault. I should have anticipated this." "It's not your fault that people are—" "It is." He turned back to her. "I promoted you without warning, without the usual vetting process, after a private meeting nobody else knew about. I gave them exactly the narrative they wanted, and now you're paying for it." Nora felt something crack open in her chest. "So what do we do?" "We make it irrelevant," Caleb said firmly. "We make your work so undeniably excellent that the only people who believe the rumors are the ones who are never going to respect you anyway." He stepped closer. "But Nora, I need you to hear this. If this becomes too much, if the pressure, the rumors, the politics, if it's destroying you, you walk away. No job is worth your mental health." "I'm not walking away." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I spent 5 years being invisible. I'm not going back to that because people want to believe I'm sleeping with the boss." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "Good. Then we fight." They walked out of the Meridian together, into the cool night air. The city was still awake, lights glittering across the skyline, traffic humming in the distance. "Can I ask you something?" Nora said as they waited for the valet to bring their cars. "Always." "Why did you really promote me? And don't say because I'm talented. You have hundreds of talented people working for you." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Because I saw someone drowning, and I remembered what that felt like." He looked at her. "And because you reminded me that talent without opportunity is just potential wasted. I've watched too many good people get buried by mediocre managers who were threatened by competence. I wasn't going to watch it happen again. Not to you. The valet pulled up with Caleb's car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than Nora would make in 5 years. "Get home safe," he said. "And Nora? You did well tonight. Better than you think." He drove away before she could respond, leaving her standing on the sidewalk in a borrowed dress, feeling more exposed and more alive than she had in years. By the time Nora got home, it was past 11. She kicked off Amanda's expensive shoes, peeled off the dress, and collapsed onto her bed, still fully made up, too exhausted to care. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Enjoy dinner? Must be nice having the CEO's protection. Wonder how long it'll last." A friend. Nora stared at the message, her stomach turning. Then she deleted it and turned off her phone. But sleep didn't come easy. She lay there in the dark, thinking about Pemberton's barely concealed hostility, Rachel's pointed warnings, the whispers that followed her everywhere. And underneath it all, the growing awareness that she'd walked into something much bigger and more dangerous than she'd realized. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. This was about survival. The following Monday, Nora arrived at work to find a printed copy of an internal memo on her desk. It was from Pemberton's office, addressed to all senior staff, outlining concerns about procedural irregularities in recent executive appointments, and calling for a review of promotion protocols to ensure fairness and transparency. He didn't mention her by name. He didn't have to. Nora read it 3 times, her hands shaking, before she finally crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. Then she opened her laptop and got to work. Because if they wanted a fight, she'd give them one. The next 3 weeks were a war fought in conference rooms and spreadsheets. Nora worked 16-hour days building her Apex strategy from the ground up, with a level of detail that bordered on obsessive. Every claim was backed by data. Every projection had 3 alternative scenarios. Every cultural insight was supported by interviews she conducted herself with consultants who actually lived in the target markets. She wasn't just proving Pemberton wrong, she was making it impossible for anyone to question her without looking foolish. But Pemberton wasn't sitting idle. He started small. A casual comment in a meeting about untested approaches. An email to the board questioning whether the revised timeline would impact Q4 projections. A suggestion during a strategy session that perhaps they should bring in someone with more international experience to validate Nora's recommendations. Each attack was surgical, professional, designed to undermine without looking overtly hostile. And it was working. Nora could see it in the way people started hesitating when she spoke. The slight pause before they agreed with her suggestions. The glances exchanged when she presented data. Doubt was creeping in, planted carefully by a man who'd spent 20 years mastering corporate warfare. Then Victor made his move. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Nora was in a conference room with Amanda's marketing team, reviewing campaign concepts for the Singapore launch, when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Claire. "Board meeting moved up to 3 p.m. You're presenting Apex. Caleb wants you there in 20 minutes. Nora's stomach dropped. The board presentation wasn't supposed to happen for another 2 weeks. She wasn't ready. Her materials were complete but not polished. Her talking points needed refinement, and she'd planned to do at least 3 full run-throughs before standing in front of the people who could kill the entire initiative with a single vote. She grabbed her laptop and ran. The boardroom was on the 74th floor, a space Nora had only seen in photos. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that could seat 30, and an atmosphere that radiated power and money. By the time she arrived, slightly breathless and definitely underprepared, the board members were already taking their seats. Caleb stood at the head of the table, looking every bit the controlled CEO, but Nora caught the tension in his shoulders. Something was wrong. "Ms. Bennett," he said calmly, "thank you for joining us on short notice. We've had a development that requires us to accelerate the Apex timeline discussion." Nora set up her laptop with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. She could feel the board members watching her, 12 people who collectively controlled billions in assets and had forgotten more about business than she'd ever learn. And sitting 3 seats down from Caleb, looking perfectly comfortable, was Victor Hale. Nora's blood went cold. What was he doing here? He wasn't senior enough for board meetings. He shouldn't even be on this floor. "Before we begin," Pemberton said smoothly, I think it's important the board understands some context regarding Miss Bennett's appointment to this project. He nodded to Victor. Mr. Hale has brought to my attention some concerns about the foundational research underlying the Apex strategy. I thought it prudent to have him present before we commit significant resources based on potentially compromised data. Nora's mind raced. Compromised data? What was he talking about? Caleb's expression didn't change, but his voice was ice. What concerns specifically? Victor stood, smooth and confident, holding a folder that Nora recognized with dawning horror. It was her original Q3 strategy, the one he'd stolen and presented as his own months ago. I apologize for the disruption, Victor said with perfectly calibrated humility, but as Ms. Bennett's former supervisor, I felt obligated to bring this to Mr. Pemberton's attention. During my review of the Apex documentation, I noticed significant portions of the market analysis were taken directly from research conducted by my department. Research that Ms. Bennett had access to but did not have authorization to use for external projects. The room went silent. Nora felt the floor tilt. He was accusing her of stealing, of building her entire strategy on work that wasn't hers. "That's not true," she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "I have the original files here," Victor continued, ignoring her. "Metadata, timestamps, author records, all clearly showing that this research originated from my team's work on the European expansion last year." He passed copies around the table. Ms. Bennett was a junior analyst on that project. She had access to the materials but not the authority to repurpose them without proper attribution or approval. Pemberton leaned back in his chair, his expression one of concerned gravity. If true, this represents a serious ethical violation. Not to mention it calls into question the validity of everything we're about to approve. Nora's hands clenched into fists under the table. This was it, the attack she'd been waiting for. Except it wasn't just about her competence anymore. Victor was trying to destroy her credibility completely, to make her not just wrong, but dishonest. "May I see that?" Caleb's voice cut through the rising murmur of concern. Victor handed him the folder. Caleb paged through it slowly, his face unreadable. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Then he looked up at Victor. "This is the European expansion research from last year?" "Yes, sir." "The strategy you presented to the board in March?" Victor hesitated just for a second. "That's correct." "The one you claim to have developed personally over a 6-month period?" "I led the team that—" "Yes or no, Mr. Hale? Did you claim personal credit for this work?" Victor's jaw tightened. "The work was produced under my supervision." Caleb set down the folder and turned to Nora. His expression was neutral, but she could see the question in his eyes. A chance to defend herself, or bury herself. Nora stood. Her legs were shaking, but she locked her knees and forced herself to look at the board. "Mr. Hale is correct that I had access to the European expansion research," she said clearly. "I had access because I wrote it. Every analysis, every market assessment, every risk projection. I spent 7 months on that project while working under Mr. Hale's supervision." She opened her laptop, her fingers moving with precision despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "And I can prove it." She connected to the boardroom's display screen. Her hands flew across the keyboard, pulling up files, metadata, email chains. "This is the original research document," Nora said, her voice gaining strength. "Created on September 14th of last year. Author, Nora Bennett. Last modified by Victor Hale, March 2nd, 3 days before the board presentation." She pulled up another screen. "This is the email chain where I submitted my initial findings to Mr. Hale, September 28th. You'll note his response was to incorporate these insights into the final presentation." Victor's face had gone pale. "This is taken out of context. This is the revision history," Nora continued, ignoring him, "showing that every substantive edit was made by me over a 6-month period. Mr. Hale's contributions consisted primarily of formatting changes and the addition of his name to the title page." She looked directly at Victor now. "The same thing he did with my Q3 marketing strategy, and my Q1 consumer analysis, and my digital transformation proposal." She pulled up file after file, each one showing the same pattern. Work created by Nora, submitted to Victor, presented by Victor with minimal changes and his name prominently displayed. For the past 5 years, Nora said, her voice quiet but clear, I have watched Mr. Hale build his reputation on work he didn't do. I stayed quiet because I needed the job, because I thought eventually someone would notice, because I was afraid that speaking up would cost me my career. She looked at the board members, meeting each gaze. But I'm not afraid anymore, and I'm not going to let him destroy my credibility by accusing me of the exact thing he's been doing for years. The boardroom was dead silent. Victor stood abruptly. This is absurd. She had access to the files. She could have easily altered the metadata. Sit down, Mr. Hale. Caleb's voice was soft but absolute. Victor sat. Caleb turned to Pemberton. Did you verify any of this before bringing it to the board? Pemberton's expression was carefully controlled. Mr. Hale came to me with concerns. I thought they warranted examination. You thought they warranted ambushing Ms. Bennett in a board meeting without giving her advance notice or the opportunity to respond? Caleb's tone could have frozen water. That's not examination. That's sabotage. I was acting in the company's best interest. You were acting in your own interest. Caleb stood, his authority filling the room. You've been trying to undermine the Apex revision since the day Mrs. Bennett proposed it. Not because it's flawed, but because you can't stand the idea that someone else might have a better approach than yours. He looked at Victor. And you saw an opportunity to destroy someone who made you look incompetent by comparison. Victor's hands were clenched on the table. With all due respect, sir, you can't possibly believe— What I believe, Caleb said coldly, is what the evidence shows. And the evidence shows that you've been taking credit for work you didn't do while the person who actually did it got nothing. He turned to the board. I'm suspending Mr. Hale pending a full investigation into his conduct. If what Miss Bennett presented here is accurate, and I have no reason to believe it isn't, he'll be terminated. You can't do this, Victor said, his composure finally cracking. I've been with this company for 12 years. I've delivered results. You've delivered other people's results. Caleb gestured to security, who'd appeared at the door. Escort Mr. Hale out of the building. He's to have no access to company systems or files pending the investigation. Victor looked around the room, searching for allies, for someone who'd defend him. He found only silence. As security led him out, he stopped beside Nora. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, he said quietly. Caleb Rowan won't always be there to protect you, and when he's not, you're going to wish you'd stayed invisible. Get him out of here, Caleb said flatly. The door closed behind Victor. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. One of the board members, an older woman named Patricia Feng, who Nora recognized from company photos, leaned forward. Ms. Bennett, she said carefully, that was quite the presentation, but I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Nora's stomach tightened. Here it comes. The optics of this situation are troubling, Patricia continued. A junior employee promoted rapidly to senior advisor, a former supervisor making accusations that, while apparently false, raise questions about the appropriateness of certain professional relationships, and now a very public confrontation that, regardless of its merits, will fuel speculation about favoritism and impropriety. Are you suggesting Ms. Bennett should be penalized for defending herself against false accusations? Caleb's voice was dangerous. I'm suggesting that we need to consider how this looks, Patricia replied evenly. Ms. Bennett may be entirely qualified for her position. Her work may be exemplary, but perception matters in business, Caleb. And the perception that she receives special treatment due to a personal relationship with the CEO is damaging to her, to you, and to this company. The words hung in the air like poison. Nora felt something inside her snap, not break, snap, like a bone setting after being fractured too long. You're right, she said quietly. Every head turned toward her. The optics are terrible, Nora continued. A woman gets promoted quickly, and people assume she slept her way there, because that's easier to believe than the possibility that she might actually be good at her job. She looked at Patricia. I understand your concern about perception, Ms. Feng, but here's what I don't understand. Where was this concern about perception when Victor Hale was stealing my work for 5 years? Where was the worry about impropriety when Pemberton brought unverified accusations into a board meeting specifically designed to humiliate me? Where was the discussion about optics when talented people get buried by mediocre managers because challenging the status quo might look bad? Patricia's expression was unreadable. Those are fair questions. They are, Nora agreed. And here's another one. If I were a man, would we be having this conversation? If a male analyst had been promoted to senior advisor after proving his competence, would we be worried about the appearance of favoritism? Or would we just call it what it is, recognizing talent and giving it the opportunity to succeed? The room was so quiet, Nora could hear her own heartbeat. I didn't ask for special treatment, she continued. I asked to be seen, to have my work judged on its merits instead of being filtered through someone who took credit for it. And when Mr. Rowan gave me that chance, I delivered. The Apex strategy isn't good because I have a special relationship with the CEO. It's good because I spent 3 weeks building an analysis that accounts for cultural complexity most people ignore. It's good because I did the work. She pulled up her presentation. So here's what I suggest. Judge me on this. Not on gossip, not on speculation about who I know or how I got here. Judge me on whether this strategy will work. And if it won't, tell me why, and I'll fix it. But if we're going to have a conversation about perception and propriety, let's have it after we determine whether I actually know what I'm doing. Patricia Feng smiled slightly. Fair enough. Let's see what you have. The presentation took 45 minutes. Nora walked the board through every element of her strategy: market analysis, cultural adaptation frameworks, partnership structures, risk mitigation protocols, timeline revisions, budget projections. She anticipated their questions before they asked them, addressed concerns before they could become objections, and presented alternatives for every major decision point. It wasn't perfect. Her voice shook twice. She stumbled over a stat about Thai consumer behavior. And she definitely saw a few board members exchange skeptical glances when she suggested a slower rollout than Pemberton's original plan. But she didn't fall apart. And the strategy held. When she finished, the board was silent for a long moment. Then Patricia spoke. Questions for Ms. Bennett? A gray-haired man Nora didn't recognize raised his hand. The cultural adaptation framework. You're suggesting we essentially create different brand identities for each market rather than maintaining consistent global branding. That's a significant departure from how we've operated historically. What's your confidence level that this won't dilute brand recognition? High, Nora said without hesitation. Because we're not changing what the brand stands for. We're changing how we communicate it. A brand isn't just a logo and a slogan, it's a promise. And that promise has to resonate with the people you're making it to. In Vietnam, trust comes from community endorsement. In Singapore, it comes from demonstrable quality and prestige. In Thailand, it comes from cultural authenticity. We can't promise those things the same way and expect the same results. Another board member jumped in. What about cost? Localization at this scale isn't cheap. It's not, Nora agreed, which is why the revised budget is 18% higher than Pemberton's original proposal. But that 18% is insurance against a much larger loss. If we enter these markets with a one-size-fits-all approach and fail, we don't just lose money. We lose credibility. And in markets where Western companies are already viewed with suspicion, credibility is everything. We won't get a second chance. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. Nora answered each one, feeling her confidence grow with every response. This was what she was good at. Not politics, not perception management, not playing games, just the work. Finally, Patricia called for a vote. All in favor of approving the revised Apex Initiative strategy as presented by Ms. Bennett? Every hand went up, including Pemberton's, though his expression suggested it physically hurt. Motion carries. Patricia looked at Nora. Good work, Ms. Bennett. I look forward to seeing how this develops. The meeting adjourned. Board members filed out, a few offering Nora brief congratulations, others simply nodding as they passed. Pemberton left without looking at her. When the room finally emptied, Nora collapsed into the nearest chair, her whole body shaking with released adrenaline. Caleb sat down beside her. You okay? I don't know, she said honestly. I think I just burned every bridge I had. You saved yourself from drowning. He leaned back, exhaustion evident in his face. And you did it without my help. That's important. Victor's going to make my life hell. Victor's done. The investigation will take maybe a week before we have enough to terminate him. And even if somehow he survives it, he'll never work in this industry again. Caleb's voice was flat, certain. You destroyed him in there. Nora thought about Victor's face as security let him out. The rage and humiliation and shock. Part of her felt guilty. Most of her felt nothing at all.
He destroyed himself, she said quietly. I just made sure everyone could see it. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the city through the windows. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Can I ask you something? Nora said. Always? Did you know about Victor and the stolen work? Caleb was quiet for a long time. I suspected. I didn't have proof until you showed it to me that first night in my office. But I've seen the pattern before. Talented person, mediocre manager, sudden inexplicable jump in the manager's performance. It doesn't take a genius to connect the dots. Why didn't you do something sooner? Because without proof, it's just speculation. And speculation destroys careers. He looked at her. You had to be the one to present the evidence. Otherwise, it would have looked like I was protecting you rather than uncovering misconduct. The outcome would have been the same, but the narrative would have been different. You would have been the woman the CEO rescued instead of the woman who fought back. Nora understood. Hated it, but understood. For what it's worth, Caleb added, I'm sorry you had to go through that. The ambush, the accusation, having to defend yourself in front of the board without warning. That was Pemberton's doing, not mine. If I'd known, you would have stopped it, Nora finished. I know, but maybe it's better this way. Now everyone knows what I'm capable of and what I won't tolerate. Caleb smiled slightly. You scared Patricia. That's not easy to do. I scared myself. Nora stood, gathering her laptop. I need to go home and sleep for about 16 hours. You earned it. Caleb stood as well. Take tomorrow off, seriously. I don't want to see you in the office. I have the Singapore vendor calls at 9. Amanda can handle them. Take the day. Recover. Process. He paused. And Nora, what you did in there today? Standing up to Patricia, defending yourself, refusing to let them make you small again? That took guts. Don't forget that when the doubt creeps back in. The doubt was already creeping in, but Nora just nodded and headed for the elevator. She made it to the lobby before the tears started. Not sad tears, not scared tears, something else. Relief and rage and exhaustion and triumph all mixed together into something she couldn't name. She sat in her car in the parking garage and cried until her makeup was ruined and her throat hurt, and then she drove home in the dark and climbed into bed fully clothed. Her phone buzzed, a text from Amanda. Heard you went full warrior princess in the board meeting, drinks tomorrow to celebrate? Then Rachel. Victor's escorted out, Pemberton's humiliated. You're officially terrifying. Well played. Then Jason. Welcome to the Sharks Who Bite Back Club. Population, not enough. And finally, from a number she didn't recognize, but somehow knew was Caleb. You did good today. Sleep well. Nora set her phone down and stared at the ceiling, her mind still racing despite her exhaustion. She'd won. Against Victor, against Pemberton, against the board's doubts, and the company's whispers and her own fear of being too much, too loud, too visible. She'd won. So why did it feel like the fight was just beginning? The answer came 2 days later when Nora returned to the office and found her door vandalized. Someone had scratched the word whore into the nameplate, deep enough that it couldn't be buffed out. She stood there staring at it, her stomach turning, trying to process the hatred behind that single word. Maintenance is replacing it, Claire said from behind her. I've already filed a report with security. They're reviewing camera footage. Nora didn't turn around. Who would do this? Someone who's angry you're still standing. Claire's voice was matter-of-fact. The question is whether it's an isolated incident or the beginning of something worse. It was the beginning. Over the next week, Nora received 3 anonymous emails suggesting she'd be better off finding a new opportunity before things get ugly. Her car was keyed in the parking garage.
Someone started a rumor that she'd been seen leaving Caleb's penthouse at 2 a.m., which was completely false but spread like wildfire anyway. The whispers got louder, the looks got colder, and Pemberton, though publicly cordial, seemed to be everywhere she was, his presence a constant reminder that he hadn't forgotten or forgiven. Nora reported each incident to HR, documented everything, kept her head down and focused on the work. But inside, she was terrified. Because Victor had been right about one thing. Caleb couldn't always protect her, and the people who wanted her gone were patient, strategic, and willing to fight dirty. On Friday evening, Nora was packing up to leave when her office door opened. Pemberton stood there looking more tired than usual. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Every instinct told her to say no, but curiosity won out. "Sure." He closed the door and sat down across from her desk. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. Nora blinked. Of all the things she had expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. "I let my ego get in the way of good judgment," Pemberton continued. "Your apex revision is better than my original strategy. I knew it the moment you presented it, but admitting that felt like admitting I'd lost a step, that I wasn't as sharp as I used to be. So instead of supporting you, I tried to tear you down." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. That was unprofessional, and it was wrong. Nora didn't trust it. Couldn't afford to. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Patricia Fang cornered me yesterday and told me in no uncertain terms that if I didn't get over myself and start acting like a senior executive instead of a threatened child, she'd recommend my removal from the board advisory committee." He smiled without humor. "Apparently my behavior in the board meeting was embarrassing and beneath the standards of this organization." "Patricia said that?" "Among other things, most of which I deserved." Pemberton stood. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Ms. Bennett. I'm asking you to let me prove I can be better than I've been. Your strategy is good. You deserve support, not sabotage. And if you're willing to give me a chance to be part of the solution instead of the problem, I'd like to help make Apex succeed." He extended his hand. Nora looked at it for a long moment. This could be genuine. Or it could be another strategy, a different kind of attack disguised as peace. But sitting here refusing to accept an olive branch made her just as small as the people trying to keep her down. She shook his hand. "One chance, Mr. Pemberton. That's all you get." "That's all I'm asking for." He left. Nora sat there alone, trying to figure out if she'd just made an ally or armed an enemy. Her phone buzzed. Caleb. "Dinner? My treat. You look like you could use a break." Nora smiled despite everything. "Where?" "Somewhere that doesn't remind us we work together. 8 p.m.? See you there." She gathered her things and headed out, passing Marcus at the security desk on her way. "You hanging in there, Miss Bennett?" he asked. "Trying to," she admitted. "Keep your head up. People like you always make it through. It's the ones trying to hold you back who end up falling." He smiled. "My wife says to tell you she's proud of you. Saw the clip of you in that board meeting. Said you reminded her of herself 30 years ago." "There's a clip?" "Someone leaked it online, cut out Victor and Pemberton. Just kept your part. It's going viral." Marcus pulled it up on his phone. 2 million views and counting. Nora watched herself on the screen, standing in front of the board, defending her work with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The comments were brutal. Half called her inspiring, half called her worse things than what had been carved into her nameplate. But she was still standing, and that, Nora realized as she walked out into the cool evening air, was what mattered. Not winning perfectly, not being liked, not avoiding the fight, just refusing to go down. The restaurant Caleb chose was nothing like Nora expected. No white tablecloths, no chandeliers, no waiters in tuxedos. Just a small Italian place tucked into a neighborhood she'd never been to, with checkered tablecloths and bread that came in a basket instead of on china plates. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table in jeans and a sweater that made him look younger, less like the CEO who commanded boardrooms, and more like someone's older brother. "This is where you take your business associates?" Nora asked as she sat down. "This is where I take people I actually want to talk to." Caleb poured her a glass of wine from the bottle he'd already ordered. "The fancy places are all performance. Here, you can just be human." Nora took a sip. It was good wine, probably better than anything served in this casual setting should be. How did you find this place? My wife loved it. The words came out easily, but Nora saw the flicker of pain cross his face. We used to come here every Friday night before Emma was born. It was our escape from everything else. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife directly. Nora didn't know what to say, so she just waited. Sarah, Caleb continued, staring at his wine glass. Her name was Sarah, and before you ask the question everyone asks, she died in a car accident 4 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light. She was gone before the ambulance arrived.
I'm sorry, Nora said quietly.
Everyone is.
He looked up at her.
That's what people always say.
And I appreciate it, I do. But sorry doesn't bring her back. It doesn't make Emma stop asking why Mommy isn't at her dance recitals. It doesn't make the bed feel less empty. He paused. I'm not telling you this to make you uncomfortable. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something.
When I saw you in my office that night, ready to quit because you'd been made invisible for too long, I saw someone who reminded me that there's still fight left in the world, that not everyone gives up when things get hard.
Nora's throat tightened. I almost did give up. But you didn't. That's what matters. Caleb leaned back as the waiter appeared with menus.
They ordered without looking, both too tired to care about choices. After the waiter left, Nora said, Can I ask you something personal? After what I just told you, I think we're past the point of professional boundaries. Do you ever regret it? Building the company, pouring everything into success? Does it feel worth it? But Caleb considered the question for a long time. Some days, yes. Some days I look at Emma and think I'm doing this for her, building something that will give her security and opportunities I never had. Other days I think I'm just hiding from the fact that I don't know how to be anything other than the CEO, that if I stopped working, I'd have to face how lonely I actually am. The honesty of it hit Nora hard. She'd spent so much time seeing Caleb as the powerful executive, the man who had everything, that she'd never considered he might be as lost as she was. For what it's worth, she said, I think you're a better father than you give yourself credit for. Emma's lucky to have you. You've never met Emma. I've seen the way you talk about her. That tells me everything I need to know. Caleb smiled, a real smile this time. She's been asking about you, actually. Heard me mention your name on a call and wanted to know who Nora was and why Daddy talked about her all the time. Nora felt her face warm. What did you tell her? That you're someone very smart who's helping Daddy with work, and that maybe someday she could meet you if you wanted. The implication hung between them. This wasn't just dinner between colleagues anymore. This was something shifting, something crossing a line that maybe shouldn't be crossed. I'd like that, Nora said carefully. Meeting her, I mean. Yeah? Caleb's expression softened. She'd like you. You're real. Emma's good at spotting fake people. Comes from having a father whose entire life is surrounded by them. The food arrived, giving them both a moment to step back from whatever precipice they'd been approaching. They ate and talked about safer things, movies, books, the ridiculous price of rent in the city, Marcus's stories about the early days of Rowan Global when it was just 10 people in a rented office space. It was easy, comfortable in a way Nora hadn't expected, and dangerous for exactly that reason. As they were finishing dessert, Caleb's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression changed. I need to take this. It's Emma's nanny. He stepped outside. Nora watched through the window as his body language shifted from relaxed to tense. When he came back in, he looked exhausted. Emma's running a fever. Nothing serious, but Rebecca wants me to come home. He pulled out his wallet. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Go. Nora stood. She needs you more than I do. Caleb hesitated, then grabbed his jacket. This was supposed to be your break from everything. I ruined it. You didn't ruin anything. And Caleb? She touched his arm briefly. Thank you for seeing me as a person instead of just an employee. It means more than you know. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded and left. Nora sat back down, finished her wine, and tried not to think about how much she'd wanted him to stay. The next 2 months were a blur of execution. The Apex initiative moved from strategy to implementation, and Nora found herself on planes to Singapore, Vietnam, and Thailand more often than she was in her own apartment. She met with local partners, navigated cultural differences that would have torpedoed a less careful approach, and slowly built the foundation for what everyone was now calling the Bennett method. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they got more creative. But Nora learned to ignore them, focusing instead on the work and the small team of people who actually believed in what she was building. Pemberton, to his credit, kept his word. He wasn't warm, wasn't friendly, but he was professional. He shared resources, offered introductions to contacts in the target markets, and even defended her approach when other executives questioned it. Victor was gone. Fired after a 2-week investigation that uncovered 5 years of systematic plagiarism. Nora heard through the rumor mill that he'd tried to sue for wrongful termination, but couldn't find a lawyer willing to take the case once they saw the evidence. She felt nothing about it. No satisfaction, no guilt. Just the quiet relief of a threat neutralized. But the real change came in her relationship with Caleb. They started having coffee every Monday morning, ostensibly to review the week ahead, but really just to talk. He asked her opinion on things that had nothing to do with work, how to help Emma deal with a bully at school, whether he should sell his late wife's car or keep it, what she thought about the new city park proposal. And slowly, without either of them acknowledging it, something shifted. It started with small things. Caleb touching her shoulder when he passed her desk. Nora staying late to help him prep for board meetings, even when she didn't need to be there. Text messages that didn't have anything to do with work, just checking in. Then one night in November, 3 months after that first dinner, everything changed. Nora was working late, finalizing contracts with a Vietnamese distribution partner, when Caleb appeared in her doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," he said, setting one on her desk. "You're still here?" She glanced at the clock. Almost midnight. "Emma's at my sister's for the weekend. House felt too quiet." He sat down in the chair across from her. "What are you working on?" "The Ho Chi Minh City Partnership. They want additional guarantees about local hiring practices. Smart on their part, honestly. We've made a lot of promises. And they want to make sure we follow through. Can we deliver?" "If we're serious about this, yes. If we're just paying lip service to cultural sensitivity, no." Nora leaned back. "That's the thing nobody wants to hear. Doing this right is expensive and slow, but doing it wrong destroys everything." Caleb smiled. "You sound like me 10 years ago, before I learned that most people don't actually want things done right. They want things done fast and cheap." "Is that what you think I am? Young and idealistic?" "I think you're someone who still believes the work matters more than the optics. I hope you never lose that." He paused. "Even though this job will try its hardest to beat it out of you." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, the city glittered against the dark sky. The building was empty except for security and the skeleton crew of workaholics who never seemed to leave. "Can I tell you something?" Nora said quietly. "Something I probably shouldn't say out loud. Always. Sometimes I miss being invisible. I know that sounds insane after everything I've fought for, but there are moments when I think about how simple it was when nobody expected anything from me, when I could just do the work without everyone watching, waiting for me to fail." Caleb nodded slowly. "I get that. More than you know. Do you ever regret it? The success? The visibility? All of it?" "Every single day." He set down his coffee cup. "But then I think about the alternative. Going back to being powerless, watching other people make decisions that affect thousands of lives without caring about the consequences. And I realize I'd rather carry the weight than pretend I don't see it." Song. He looked at her. "You're carrying it now, too. The question is whether you let it crush you or whether you learn to hold it steady." "How do you do that? Hold it steady?" "You find something that reminds you why it matters. For me, it's Emma, knowing that I'm building something that might make the world a little better for her generation." He hesitated. "And lately, it's been watching you fight, seeing someone refuse to be made small. That reminds me why I started this company in the first place." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Nora's heart was pounding. She should say something professional, something that pulled them back from wherever this was heading. Instead, she said, "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You know that, right?" "You could have. You would have found another way, another door. Maybe not here, maybe not now, but eventually." Caleb stood, walked to the window. I just happened to be the one who opened it when you were ready to kick it down. Nora joined him at the window. The city spread out below them, millions of lives moving through the darkness, each one carrying their own weight. Caleb, she said softly. He turned to look at her. In that moment, standing close enough to feel the warmth of him, Nora saw everything she'd been trying to ignore for months. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, the careful distance he maintained in public, the quiet loneliness that matched her own. This is a bad idea, he said quietly. I know. It'll complicate everything. The optics will be terrible. People will say you only succeeded because of this, that everything you've accomplished was just, I know, Nora repeated, and I don't care anymore. They stood there, the space between them charged with all the things they hadn't said. Then Caleb stepped back, creating distance. I'm not doing this to you, he said firmly. I'm not letting you sacrifice your reputation for something that might not even work. You fought too hard to let people reduce you to the woman who's sleeping with her boss. The words stung, even though Nora knew he was right. What if I want to make that choice for myself? She asked. Then I'm making the choice for both of us, because I care about you too much to let you destroy what you've built. He moved toward the door. Go home, Nora. Get some sleep. We'll talk when we're both thinking clearly. He left. Nora stood alone in her office, her hands shaking, her chest tight with emotions she didn't know how to name. She wanted to be angry, wanted to resent him for making decisions for her, but all she felt was a strange mix of frustration and relief. Because he was right. Getting involved would give ammunition to everyone who already thought she didn't belong. It would turn everything she'd accomplished into a punchline, but it didn't stop her from wanting it anyway. The holidays came and went. Nora threw herself into work, spending Christmas alone in her apartment because she couldn't face going home to her family and explaining everything that had happened. Caleb sent her a gift, a leather portfolio with her initials embossed on the cover and a note that just said, for the strategies only you could write. She sent him nothing because she didn't trust herself to keep it professional. In January, 6 months after that rainy Thursday night, Nora's Apex strategy launched in Singapore. The opening weekend exceeded every projection. Local partners praised the cultural sensitivity, consumers responded to the localized marketing, and the business press called it a masterclass in international expansion. Patricia Feng called Nora personally to congratulate her. Pemberton sent a terse but genuine email acknowledging her success. Even Rachel, who Nora still didn't fully trust, raised a glass to her at the celebration dinner. But the person Nora most wanted to celebrate with was conspicuously absent. Caleb had flown to Singapore for the launch, but he'd kept his distance all week. Professional, polite, but distant in a way that hurt more than Nora wanted to admit. He'd congratulated her publicly, praised her work in front of the partners, and then disappeared back to his hotel. On the last night before they flew home, Nora found him on the rooftop bar of their hotel, sitting alone with a drink and watching the city lights. You're avoiding me, she said, sitting down uninvited. I'm giving you space to succeed without people thinking I'm the reason why. The launch succeeded because the strategy was good, not because of who I know. I agree, but that won't stop people from saying otherwise if they see us together outside of business contexts. He finally looked at her. I'm protecting you, Nora, even if it doesn't feel like it. I don't need protection. I need honesty. She leaned forward. So tell me honestly, is this just about optics, or is it because you're scared? Caleb's jaw tightened. Of course I'm scared. I haven't let myself feel anything real for anyone since Sarah died. And now there's you, and you're brilliant and brave and everything I didn't know I was missing. But you're also my employee, someone I promoted, someone whose career could be destroyed if we get this wrong. He set down his drink. So yes, I'm terrified, because I don't know how to do this without hurting you. Nora's chest ached. What if I'm willing to take that risk? What if I'm not? He stood. I'm going to bed. We fly out at 8. Don't be late. He walked away, leaving Nora alone with the city lights and the weight of everything unsaid. 3 months later, the Vietnam launch was even more successful than Singapore. Thailand followed 6 weeks after that. By April, Nora's strategy had generated over $200 million in new revenue and earned her a promotion to Vice President of International Strategy. She was 31 years old, A year ago, she'd been a nobody analyst ready to quit. Now she was one of the youngest VPs in company history. The announcement came during the quarterly all-hands meeting. Caleb presented it himself, his face carefully neutral as he praised her work, her vision, her execution. The applause was genuine from some people, forced from others. But it was there. Afterward, as people filed out, Amanda pulled Nora aside. "You did it," she said, grinning. "You actually did it. We'll see if I can handle it. You'll be fine. You're a shark now, remember?" Amanda's expression turned more serious. "But Nora, can I give you some advice?" "Always. Be careful with Caleb." She said it quietly, making sure no one else could hear. "I see the way you two look at each other when you think nobody's watching. And I'm telling you as a friend, not as a colleague. If something happens between you, make sure it's handled right. Transparent. Above board. Because if it comes out the wrong way, everything you've built will get reduced to that. And you deserve better." Nora nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. That evening, she was packing up her new office. Bigger, corner view, her name on a placard that said Vice President, when Caleb appeared in the doorway. "Congratulations," he said simply. "Thank you." She kept her voice level. "For the promotion. For everything. You earned it, every bit of it." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Can we talk? Really talk? Not the careful professional distance we've been doing for months?" Nora's heart started racing. "Okay." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "I've been handling this wrong. I thought I was protecting you by staying away, by keeping everything professional. But all I've done is make you feel like what we had, whatever it was, didn't matter, and that's not true." "Then what is true?" "The truth is I'm falling in love with you, and it scares me to death." The words came out raw, honest. "The truth is every success you have makes me proud and terrified in equal measure because it means you don't need me anymore. And the truth is I don't know how to be with you in a way that doesn't put everything you've worked for at risk." Nora felt tears sting her eyes. "Do you want to know my truth? Please." "My truth is I fell in love with you somewhere between that first night in your office and now. My truth is I don't care about the optics or the whispers or what people think, because the only opinion that matters to me is my own. And my truth is I'm tired of pretending I don't want this just because it's complicated." They stood there, the space between them crackling with tension and possibility. "If we do this," Caleb said slowly, "we do it right. We tell HR. We make it official and transparent. We follow every protocol to make sure nobody can say your success came from favoritism. And if at any point it becomes clear that our relationship is hurting your career, we end it. No questions, no guilt." "Those are your terms. Those are my requirements, because I will not be the reason you lose what you've built." Nora walked over to him, close enough to see the exhaustion and hope and fear in his eyes. "Okay," she said. "We do it your way, transparent, official, by the book." She reached up, touching his face gently. "But Caleb, I need you to understand something. I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be protected. I'm a fighter. And if people want to reduce my accomplishments to who I'm dating, that's their problem, not mine. Because I know what I've earned." Caleb smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. "I know you do. I just needed to hear you say it." He kissed her then, soft and careful, like he was afraid she might break. Nora kissed him back, pouring months of frustration and longing into it, and for the first time since that rainy Thursday night, she felt like she could finally breathe. When they pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to get so much scrutiny for this," he said. "I know. People are going to say terrible things. I know. Emma's going to interrogate you mercilessly." Nora laughed. "I'm looking forward to it." They stood there holding each other, two people who'd been lonely for too long, finally allowing themselves to not be. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, something new was beginning. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't simple, but it was real. And for Nora Bennett, that was enough. They told HR the following Monday. Claire scheduled the meeting with the head of human resources. a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Moretti, who'd seen every workplace drama imaginable and remained impressively unfazed by all of it. Nora sat in the conference room, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking, while Caleb explained the situation with the kind of directness that had made him a successful CEO. "We're in a relationship," he said simply. "It developed over the past several months. We want to make sure it's documented properly, and that appropriate measures are taken to avoid any conflicts of interest." Diane looked between them, her expression neutral. "How long has this been going on?" "Officially, since last week," Caleb said. "Unofficially, we've had feelings for each other for longer, but we didn't act on them until we could do it appropriately." "Ms. Bennett, you currently report directly to Mr. Rowan?"
"Yes," Nora said, finding her voice. "But we're prepared to restructure that if necessary." "It's necessary." Diane pulled out a form. "Standard protocol requires that romantic relationships between executives be disclosed and that reporting structures be adjusted to eliminate direct supervision. Ms. Bennett, you'd need to report to someone else on the executive team. Who would you suggest?" Nora had already thought about this. "Patricia Feng. She's on the board.
"She's familiar with my work on Apex, and she doesn't have a direct financial stake in my department's performance." Diane made a note. "I'll need to speak with Ms. Feng to confirm she's willing to take on that supervisory role. In the meantime, all performance reviews, compensation decisions, and promotion considerations for Ms. Bennett will go through a committee rather than a single individual. This protects both of you from accusations of favoritism." "Understood," Caleb said. "There will be gossip," Diane continued, looking at Nora. "You're aware of that?" "I've been dealing with gossip since the day I was promoted. This won't be much different." "It'll be worse," Diane said bluntly. "People have been speculating for months. This confirms what they've been whispering about. Some will say you only got promoted because of the relationship, even though the timeline doesn't support that. Others will question Mr. Rowan's judgment. It won't be pleasant." "I know," Nora said quietly, "but I'd rather deal with it honestly than keep hiding and feel like I'm doing something wrong when I'm not." Diane nodded slowly. "All right, I'll process the paperwork and schedule a meeting with Ms. Feng. Expect the announcement to go out by end of week. And Ms. Bennett? For what it's worth, I've been watching your career trajectory. The relationship doesn't diminish what you've accomplished. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The announcement went out on Friday via internal memo. By Friday afternoon, Nora's inbox was flooded with responses ranging from congratulations to thinly veiled hostility. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from people she barely knew, all wanting to comment on her personal life. Amanda's text was the most direct. "Finally, everyone with eyes has known for months. Congrats on making it official." Rachel's was more cautious. "Brave move. Hope you're ready for the fallout." Well, Jason sent, "Rowan's a lucky guy. Don't let the bastards grind you down." And from a number she didn't recognize, "Gold digger. Hope it was worth selling your integrity." Nora deleted that one and turned off her phone. Meeting Emma happened 2 weeks later on a Saturday afternoon at Caleb's house, a sprawling place in the suburbs that somehow still felt empty despite its size. Nora stood on the front porch holding a carefully chosen gift, her stomach in knots. "She's going to love you," Caleb said, squeezing her hand before opening the door. "Or interrogate you until you crack. Possibly both." Emma was 6 years old with her father's dark hair and her late mother's green eyes. She stood in the entryway wearing a princess dress and rain boots, studying Nora with the kind of serious intensity usually reserved for scientists examining new specimens. "Your dad's girlfriend," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I am," Nora confirmed, crouching down to eye level. "I'm Nora. It's nice to meet you. Are you going to try to be my new mom?" The question was so direct it took Nora's breath away. She glanced at Caleb, who looked pained but didn't intervene. "No," Nora said honestly. "You already have a mom. Nobody can replace her. I'm just someone who cares about your dad and wants to get to know you, if that's okay." Emma considered this. "Did you bring me a present?" "I did." Nora held out the wrapped package. "Your dad said you like building things." Emma tore into the paper and pulled out an advanced robotics kit designed for kids her age. Her eyes went wide. "This is the one I wanted. Dad said it was too expensive. Emma, Caleb said warningly. He did. She looked at Nora with newfound respect. Can you help me build it? If you want me to. Okay, but I'm in charge. Deal. They spent the afternoon on the living room floor, building a robot that could move on voice commands. Emma was bossy, brilliant, and utterly unself-conscious about asking Nora questions that ranged from, why do you like my dad? To, do you know how to make mac and cheese? To, if you and Dad get married, do I have to call you Mom? Nora answered each one as honestly as she could, watching Caleb out of the corner of her eye as he pretended to read the newspaper but was clearly listening to every word. By the time the robot was finished and Emma had made it dance across the floor, Nora felt like she'd passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. You can come back, Emma announced as Nora was getting ready to leave. But next time bring better snacks. Dad only buys the healthy stuff. Nora laughed. I'll see what I can do. In the driveway, Caleb walked her to her car. That went better than I expected. She's amazing, smart, funny, completely unfiltered. That's a nice way of saying she's a handful. He pulled Nora close. But she liked you. I can tell. How? She didn't cry or throw anything. With Emma, that's basically a glowing endorsement. Nora kissed him, feeling something settle in her chest. This was real, complicated and messy and real. I'll see you Monday, she said. Earlier if you want. I'm making dinner tomorrow night. Emma specifically requested you be there so she can show you her dance routine. I wouldn't miss it. The months that followed were a strange mix of professional triumph and personal scrutiny. Nora's work continued to exceed expectations. The Apex initiative expanded into 2 additional markets. Her team grew from 5 people to 20, and industry publications started calling her one of the rising stars in international business strategy. But every success was accompanied by whispers. People who congratulated her to her face would turn around and speculate about whether she'd earned it or whether Caleb was pulling strings behind the scenes. Blog posts appeared questioning her qualifications. Anonymous comments on business forums suggested she'd slept her way to the top. The worst part was that some of it came from other women. People who should have understood how hard it was to succeed in a male-dominated industry instead tore her down, as if her relationship invalidated everything she'd accomplished. Nora learned to develop a thick skin. She documented everything, made sure her work could stand on its own merits, and refused to engage with the gossip. But it wore on her. One particularly rough day in September, after a brutal article in a business magazine that spent more time discussing her relationship with Caleb than her actual achievements, Nora came home to find flowers on her doorstep with a note from Emma that said, "Dad says people are being mean. I think you're cool. Love, Emma." She cried for 20 minutes, then pulled herself together and got back to work. In October, Caleb made a decision that surprised everyone, including Nora. During a board meeting, he announced the creation of the Rowan Foundation, a nonprofit initiative designed to identify and mentor overlooked talent in corporate environments. Too many brilliant people get buried by mediocre management, he said, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. They burn out, quit, or worse. They stay and let their potential die because they don't see another option. This foundation will provide mentorship, resources, and advocacy for employees who are being systematically ignored or exploited. We'll partner with companies to identify these individuals and give them the support they need to succeed. The board approved it unanimously. Nora was named as a founding board member, along with Patricia Feng and several other executives who'd built their careers fighting similar battles. The first person they helped was a young analyst at a tech company whose manager had been stealing her code for 3 years. Within 6 months, she'd been promoted, her manager had been fired, and she'd filed a patent for an algorithm that would change her entire industry. The second was a marketing coordinator whose ideas had been dismissed for being too ambitious, until the foundation connected him with resources to prove his concepts worked. He launched his own agency a year later. Story after story, person after person. Each one a reminder that Nora's experience wasn't unique, but it didn't have to be permanent. In December, 2 years after that rainy Thursday night, Nora stood in the newly opened Singapore headquarters of Rowan Global, looking out at a city she'd helped the company understand. The office was beautiful, modern, efficient, but designed with cultural sensitivity that honored the local context rather than imposing Western aesthetics. Patricia Feng stood beside her, champagne glass in hand. "You should be proud. This doesn't happen without you." "It was a team effort," Nora said automatically. "Stop that." Patricia's voice was firm but not unkind. "You can acknowledge your role without diminishing others." That's a lesson a lot of successful women never learn. We're so afraid of seeming arrogant that we make ourselves small even when celebrating our achievements. Nora looked at her. "Did you struggle with that?" "For years. Then I realized that the people who were going to diminish my accomplishments would do it whether I was humble or not. So I might as well own what I'd earned." Patricia took a sip of champagne. "You've earned this, Nora. The promotion, the success, the respect, and yes, even the relationship with Caleb. You didn't choose the easy path, and you didn't let anyone make you feel like you had to." "It still bothers me sometimes, the whispers." "It should. It means you're human, but don't let it define you." Patricia gestured to the office around them. "This defines you, the work, the results, the people you've helped along the way. Everything else is just noise." That night, at the celebration dinner, Caleb gave a speech praising the team's work. He mentioned Nora specifically, calling her the architect of a strategy that didn't just enter new markets, but did it with integrity and respect. The applause was genuine. Even Pemberton, who'd flown in for the opening, raised his glass to her. Later, when the crowds had dispersed and it was just the two of them on the rooftop of the hotel, Caleb pulled out a small box. "Before you panic," he said, seeing Nora's expression, "this isn't a proposal. We're not there yet, and I know it." "Then what is it?" He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver bracelet engraved with a date. The Thursday night she'd walked into his office to quit. "A reminder," Caleb said softly, "that the worst moments can become the best ones if you're brave enough not to give up." Nora slipped it on, her eyes stinging with tears. "I love you. You know that, right?" "I know. I love you too." He pulled her close. "And I'm proud of you. Not because you're with me, because you're you." They stood there, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of loneliness and turned it into something worth building on. 6 months later, they got married. Not in some grand ceremony designed to impress, but in a quiet courthouse with Emma as their flower girl and Marcus as their witness. Emma wore her favorite princess dress and gave a speech about how Nora made good mac and cheese and taught her that girls could be engineers. The business press covered it, of course. Some articles were kind, others weren't. Nora stopped reading them after the first few. What mattered was standing beside Caleb and knowing that she'd gotten here on her own terms. That every promotion, every success, every achievement was hers. Not because of who she was with, but because of who she was. A year after the wedding, Nora was offered the position of Chief Strategy Officer. It came with a massive salary increase, a seat on the board, and oversight of all international operations. She accepted with the understanding that she'd report to Patricia, that her performance would be evaluated by a committee, and that her relationship with Caleb would never be a factor in her advancement. On her first day as CSO, she found a note on her desk from Emma that said, "Dad says you're a big deal now. I always knew you were. Can we still build robots?" Nora kept that note in her desk drawer, pulling it out on days when the imposter syndrome crept back in. The Rowan Foundation expanded beyond anyone's expectations. 3 years after its founding, it had helped over 500 people escape toxic work environments, provided mentorship to thousands more, and partnered with major corporations to implement better systems for identifying and promoting overlooked talent. Nora served as its co-chair alongside Patricia, using her own story to show others that being invisible didn't have to be permanent. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and fielded countless messages from people who saw themselves in her journey. Some thanked her, others asked for advice. A few accused her of hypocrisy, claiming she only succeeded because she married the boss. Nora learned to let those voices fade into background noise, because she knew the truth, and the people who mattered knew it too. 5 years after that rainy Thursday night, Nora stood in the same office where she'd almost quit. It looked different now,
decorated with awards, photos of successful projects, a picture of Emma at her elementary school graduation. But the view was the same, the city spreading out below, full of people carrying their own weight, fighting their own battles. Caleb appeared in the doorway. "You ready?" "Almost." Nora was preparing for a keynote speech at the Women in Business Summit. The topic, From Invisible to Unstoppable. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified, which means it matters." He smiled. "You're going to be brilliant. You always are. Even when I'm not, I'll be honest. That's what people need. Not perfection, just someone who tells the truth. That's why they love you." Nora gathered her notes, checked her appearance one last time, and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored walls. Not the scared woman who'd stood here 5 years ago, broken and ready to give up. But not someone unrecognizable either, just Nora. Stronger, wiser, carrying scars that had turned into armor. The speech went better than she'd hoped. Nora talked about invisibility, about being stolen from, about the moment she decided to stop accepting it. She talked about the backlash, the whispers, the cost of being visible. And she talked about why it was worth it anyway. "People will try to make you small," she said, looking out at the audience of women who'd all fought similar battles. "They'll steal your work, dismiss your ideas, reduce your accomplishments to who you know or who you're sleeping with. And you have a choice. You can let them. You can stay quiet, stay safe, stay invisible, or you can fight." She paused, letting the words sink in. Fighting doesn't mean being perfect. It doesn't mean never being afraid or doubting yourself. It means showing up anyway, documenting your work, demanding credit, refusing to let someone else profit from your intelligence. And when they come for you, and they will come for you, you stand your ground with evidence, with confidence, with the absolute certainty that you earned what you have. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of women approached her with their own stories. A software developer whose manager was taking credit for her code. A consultant whose ideas were being presented by senior partners. A researcher whose publications had someone else's name on them. Nora listened to each one, shared resources, made connections, and watched as these women realized they weren't alone. That night, she came home to find Emma in the kitchen, attempting to make dinner while Caleb supervised from a safe distance. "We're making your favorite," Emma announced. She was 12 now, tall and confident and entirely herself. "Well, trying to. Dad's not great at cooking." "I can hear you," Caleb called from across the kitchen. "It's true, though." Nora laughed, kissing them both before rolling up her sleeves to help. They cooked together, the three of them, in the house that had slowly transformed from a monument to grief into something that felt like home. Later, after Emma went to bed, Nora and Caleb sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Do you ever think about that night?" Caleb asked. "When you came to quit?" "All the time," Nora admitted. "It feels like a different life." "Do you miss it? The simplicity of being invisible?" She considered the question. "No, I miss not having to fight so hard. I miss the days when my biggest problem was whether I'd get credit for my work, not whether people think I only succeeded because of who I married. But I don't miss being invisible. Being seen is hard, but it's better than disappearing." Caleb took her hand. "For what it's worth, I see you. Not as my wife, not as the CSO, not as anything except who you are. And that person is extraordinary." Nora leaned into him, feeling the weight of the day, the year, the life they'd built settle into something manageable. "We did okay, didn't we?" she said quietly. "We did better than okay. We built something real." And that, Nora thought, was the lesson she'd carry forward. Success wasn't about being perfect or untouchable or above criticism. It was about being real, about fighting for yourself when nobody else would, about refusing to let other people's limitations become your own. She'd started as a woman nobody noticed, buried under someone else's ambition, convinced that invisibility was safer than being seen. She'd become someone who stood in rooms full of power and spoke with her own voice, someone who built strategies that changed entire markets, someone who helped others find their own path out of darkness. The whispers never fully stopped. There would always be people who questioned whether she'd earned it,
who reduced her accomplishments to proximity to power. But Nora had learned something crucial. Their doubt said more about them than it did about her. She knew what she'd sacrificed, what she'd built, what she'd survived. She knew the late nights, the documentation, the fight she'd won through competence rather than connection. She knew the difference between being given something and taking it. And in the end, that knowledge was enough. Years later, when Nora's daughter asked her what the most important decision she'd ever made was, Nora didn't hesitate. Walking into that office on a rainy Thursday night and refusing to disappear, she said. Everything good in my life came from that choice. Not because someone rescued me, but because I rescued myself. And then I built something worth keeping. Isti passé. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no moment when everything became easy. No point where the fight ended completely. But it was hers. Every hard-won piece of it. And that made all the difference.